The horse shouldn't have been alive. That was Nora Brennan's first thought when she saw it standing at her fence line in the middle of the worst October blizzard Montana had seen in 20 years. Not wonder, not fear. Just the cold, clinical certainty of someone who'd spent enough years on this land to recognize when something was holding on past its time. She knew what dying looked like. She'd seen it in the sky before, a drought in the stillness that meant the creek would run dry by August. She'd seen it in a newborn calf too weak to stand in the way its mother would stop trying after the third hour. She'd seen it in her husband's eyes the morning he rode out and didn't come back. And she was seeing it now in a horse that had no business still being on its feet. The stallion was black as coal ribs, showing through skin, stretched too tight. Burns seared into his flanks like someone had taken their time making sure he'd remember. He stood there, shaking, barely breathing, staring at her through the snow with eyes that said he'd run out of places to go. She should have turned away, should have gone back inside, where it was warm and safe and none of her concern. Instead, she grabbed a bucket of feed and walked out into the storm. That decision would bring 200 armed men to her gate within 24 hours. It would cost her almost everything. And it would be the most important choice she ever made. The horse shouldn't have been alive. That was Nora Brennan's first thought when she saw it standing at the fence line halfway between the barn and the dark wall of trees where the Montana wind came screaming down off the mountains. Not wonder, not fear. Just the cold, clinical certainty of someone who'd spent enough years on this land to recognize when something was holding on past its time. She knew what dying looked like. She'd seen it in the sky before, a drought in the stillness of air that meant the creek would run dry by August. She'd seen it in a newborn calf too weak to stand in the way its mother would stop trying after the third hour. She'd seen it in her husband's eyes the morning he rode out and didn't come back. And she was seeing it now in the October blizzard, in a horse that had no earthly reason to still be standing. The stallion was black, not brown, not dark bay, but the kind of black that seemed to absorb light, made darker still by the snow that clung to his coat in thick, wet clumps. He stood with his head lowered, his breath coming in shallow clouds that dissipated almost before they formed. His left foreleg trembled, not from cold, from the effort of simply existing. Nora stood on the porch of the main house with a kerosene lamp in one hand and her father's old rifle in the other, and she did not move. The wind tore at her coat. The snow came sideways hard enough to sting. She could barely see the barn 30 yards away, but she could see the horse. He was staring directly at her. Lightning cracked the sky open, and for one suspended moment the world went white, and she saw him whole. 17 hands at least, maybe more. Ribs like ladder rungs beneath skin stretched too tight. A long scar running diagonal across his right shoulder, old and raised the kind left by something deliberate. And along his left flank, visible even through the snow, a pattern of burns. Not random, methodical. The Triple Crown brand seared into his hide 3 times over, as if whoever did it wanted to make absolutely certain he could never be mistaken for anything wild. The thunder that followed wasn't sound. It was pressure, a physical thing that hit her chest and rattled the boards beneath her feet. The horse didn't move. Any animal with sense would have bolted at that. Every horse Nora had ever known would have wheeled and run, terror overriding pain survival instinct kicking in the way it always did when the sky turned violent. But this one just stood there, his dark eyes locked on hers, waiting. She lowered the rifle. She went back inside the house and set the lamp on the kitchen table. The room was small, warm in the way old houses are warm when they've been lived in long enough. The stove in the corner still held heat from dinner. The walls were lined with photographs in mismatched frames. 3 generations of Brennans staring out from moments frozen decades ago. Her grandfather in front of the original barn, 1952. Her father on horseback, 19 years old, grinning like he'd just won something. And in the center, larger than the others, Ethan. On their wedding day, his hand on her waist, both of them squinting into the sun. She looked at that photograph for longer than she meant to. Then she pulled on her heavy coat, the one with the torn pocket she kept meaning to fix, and went to the mudroom. She filled a bucket with grain from the storage bin, another with water from the pump. She grabbed a wool blanket from the shelf, one of the old ones her father had used for the plow horses back when there were still plow horses on this land. When she stepped back onto the porch, the horse was closer. Not by much, maybe 10 feet. But he'd moved, which meant he still had enough strength left to make decisions. And that changed things. A dying horse lies down. A horse still fighting stays on its feet. She walked toward him slowly, the bucket of grain heavy in her left hand, the water sloshing in her right. The wind tried to take the blanket off her shoulder. She adjusted her grip and kept moving. 30 feet. 20. 10. She stopped 6 feet from the fence and set the buckets down in the snow. The horse watched her. His nostrils flared, testing the air, reading her the way horses do. Not her fear, because she wasn't afraid. Not her intent, because she didn't have one beyond the simple fact of him standing there suffering in front of her. She lifted the bucket of grain and rested it on the top rail of the fence. The horse raised his head slightly. The effort cost him. She could see it in the way his shoulder muscles tensed, in the tremor that ran down his foreleg and into the hoof that barely touched the ground. She waited. Lightning came again, closer this time, and the thunder arrived almost on top of it. The sound was enormous, the kind that makes windows shake and sets off car alarms in towns where there are car alarms to set off. Out here, there was just the wind and the snow and the two of them standing in the dark. The horse took 1 step forward, then another. His gait was wrong, uneven, the kind of limp that spoke to something broken deeper than muscle. When he reached the fence, he lowered his head to the bucket and began to eat. Nora stood very still and watched him. Up close, the damage was worse. The burns along his flank were recent, maybe a week old, still raw enough that the snow melting against them must have hurt. The scar on his shoulder was older, a year at least, but it had healed poorly. The tissue thick and ridged. His mane was matted with burrs and ice. His hooves were cracked, overgrown, the kind of neglect that doesn't happen in a month or even 3. Someone had owned this horse. Someone had worked him hard, broken him harder, and then either lost him or let him go. She reached out slowly and rested her hand on his neck. His coat was cold wet, the muscle beneath it taut with exhaustion. He didn't pull away. He kept eating, his jaw working in slow, deliberate circles, the way animals eat when they're too tired to rush but too hungry to stop. She stood there for a long time, her hand on his neck, the snow building up on both of them. Then she went back to the barn. The barn was older than the house built by her grandfather in the years after the war, when lumber was cheap and land was cheaper. It had good bones, her father used to say, by which he meant the frame was solid, the roof didn't leak more than it should, and the foundation had settled evenly enough that the doors still closed. Nora had spent more hours in this barn than she cared to count, feeding horses before school, mucking stalls after, learning to ride on a buckskin mare named Clementine, who'd lived to 32 and died in the north pasture on a morning so clear you could see all the way to the Bitterroots. She grabbed a halter from the tack room, another blanket, and a lead rope that had seen better days. She filled a second bucket with grain and carried everything back out into the storm. The horse was still eating. She set the fresh bucket down beside the first and opened the gate to the outer paddock. It wasn't a stall, just a three-sided shelter with a roof and enough room for a horse to turn around. She spread hay on the ground, filled the water trough from the pump, and draped the blanket over the rail where he could reach it if he wanted. Then she stepped back and waited. The horse finished the first bucket. He raised his head and looked at her, then at the open gate, then back at her. For a moment she thought he might bolt, but he didn't. He walked through the gate slow and careful, favoring his left side, and moved to the fresh hay. She closed the gate behind him. She stood in the doorway of the barn and watched him eat, and something shifted in her chest. Not grief, not its opposite. Something adjacent to both. A recognition, maybe, of exhaustion so complete it became a kind of honesty. The horse wasn't running anymore. Whatever had driven him here through the storm and across however many miles of open country, it had used up everything he had left. He was here because here was as far as he could go. She understood that. She went back to the house. Inside, she peeled off her wet coat and hung it by the stove. Her hands were numb. She ran them under warm water until the feeling came back, then filled the kettle and set it on the burner. While the water heated, she stood at the window and looked out toward the barn. The storm was getting worse. The wind had shifted, coming now from the northwest. The direction that always meant the cold would settle in and stay. By morning, the roads would be impassable. The power lines, which were already questionable on a good day, would likely be down. She'd be alone out here for at least 2 days, maybe 3. Alone except for the horse and Willa. And she turned from the window and looked at the closed door at the end of the hall. Her daughter's room. The light was off. Willa would be asleep by now, or pretending to be, which was close enough to the same thing. 8 years old and already practicing the kind of silence that spoke louder than words. Nora poured herself a cup of water, too tired to bother with tea, and sat down at the kitchen table. The wood was scarred and uneven, marked by decades of use. Ethan had sat here every morning for the 9 years they were married, drinking coffee and reading the grain reports. His hands wrapped around the mug like he was holding on to something warm in a world that ran cold. She missed him. Not the way she had in the first months after his death, when the grief was sharp and immediate, a physical ache that made it hard to breathe. This was duller, more permanent, the feeling of something missing that would always be missing. She looked at the photograph on the wall, Ethan's face frozen in a moment of happiness that felt like it belonged to someone else's life. The wind rattled the windows. She closed her eyes. She didn't know she'd fallen asleep until the knocking woke her. It was still dark. The clock on the wall read 4:30. The knocking came again, insistent. The sound of knuckles on wood that meant someone needed in and wasn't interested in waiting. Nora stood cross to the door and opened it. Boone McCready stood on the porch, snow in his hair, and his coat buttoned wrong like he'd dressed in a hurry. He was 67 years old and looked every year of it. Tall, lean in the way men get when they've worked their whole lives and never had enough time to sit down. His face was weathered lined deep around the eyes and mouth, the kind of lines that come from squinting into too many suns and smiling at too few jokes. He'd been foreman of Brennan Ridge for 30 years. Before that, he'd worked for Nora's father. Before that, he'd been a Marine, though he didn't talk about it much. He looked at her now with an expression she couldn't quite read. "You brought it in," he said. Not a question. A statement. Nora stepped aside and let him in. He stomped the snow off his boots and stood in the mudroom dripping onto the floor. "I gave it food and shelter," Nora said. "That's all." Boone looked at her for a long moment. Then he nodded slow, like he was working through something in his head he didn't much like the shape of. "You know whose horse that is," he said. "I know the brand." "Then you know what's coming." She crossed her arms. "It's a horse, Boone. It was dying. I'm not in the habit of letting animals suffer on my property. That's not just any horse." His voice was quiet, but there was weight in it. The kind of weight that meant he'd thought about this, turned it over, and come to a conclusion he didn't want to share, but was going to anyway. "That's Ash, Harlan Drexel's champion breeding stallion. Worth more than this ranch, the land it's on, and every head of cattle you've got combined." Then Harlan Drexel should have taken better care of it. "Nora." Boone took off his hat and held it in both hands. "Drexel doesn't lose things. If that horse is here, it's because it ran. And if it ran, it's because something happened. Something bad enough that a $2 million animal chose a blizzard over going back." She said nothing. "He'll come for it," Boone said. "And when he does, he won't come alone." The wind picked up outside, and somewhere in the distance a tree branch cracked under the weight of the snow. Nora looked at the old man standing in her mudroom dripping and worried, and she felt the tiredness settle into her bones. "Let him come," she said. Boone stared at her. "You don't mean that." "I do." "Nora, listen to me." "I'm done listening, Boone." Her voice was sharper than she meant it to be. She took a breath and softened it. "I've spent 2 years listening. To the bank, to the lawyers, to every neighbor and well-meaning friend who's told me the smart thing to do is sell this place and move somewhere easier. I'm tired of listening." Boone set his hat on the table and sat down heavily in one of the chairs. He looked older sitting than he did standing, the way old men do when the weight finally catches up with them. "Your father asked me to look after you," he said quietly. "Ethan asked me the same thing. I gave them both my word." "I know." "Then let me do that. Let me take the horse back to Drexel before this gets ugly." Nora sat down across from him. The table felt too wide, like there was more distance between them than just the wood. "You think Ethan's death was an accident?" she said. Boone didn't answer right away. When he did, his voice was careful. "I think accidents happen. You don't believe that." He looked at her and something passed across his face. Guilt, maybe. or the exhaustion of carrying a truth too heavy to set down. "No," he said finally. "I don't." The admission hung in the air between them. "How long have you known?" Nora asked. 2 years, since the day we found him. "And you didn't tell me." "I didn't have proof. I still don't. Just a feeling. And feelings don't hold up when men like Drexel come calling with lawyers and sheriffs in their pockets." Nora leaned back in her chair. The exhaustion was back pressing down on her from all sides. "Tell me." Boone sighed. He ran a hand through his hair, gray and thinning, and stared at the table like the words were written there, and he just needed to find them. "Ethan was looking into water rights," he said. 6 months before he died. He didn't tell you because he didn't want you worrying, and I didn't tell you because I thought he was being paranoid. But he wasn't. Water rights to what? The East Pasture. The 40 acres your grandfather bought back in the 50s. Ethan had the land surveyed, found an underground aquifer. Big one. Feeds every ranch in a 30-mile radius, including Drexel's Triple Crown. Nora felt something cold settle in her stomach. And Ethan wanted to claim it. He wanted to protect it. There's a difference. Boone looked up at her. "Drexel's been overusing his water allotment for years, pumping more than he's legally allowed, letting runoff poison the creek. Ethan had documentation. He was going to file a complaint with the state, get Drexel's operation audited. And then he died. 3 days later." Boone's jaw tightened. "Riding accident, they said. Horse spooked through him, he hit his head. Clean and simple. Except Ethan was the best rider I ever knew. And the horse, they said, through him was a 15-year-old gelding so gentle you could have put a toddler on his back. The wind outside howled and the house creaked in response." "You think Drexel killed him?" Nora said. "I think Ethan had something Drexel wanted buried. And I think convenient accidents happen to people who get in Harlan Drexel's way." Nora stood and walked to the window. The snow was falling harder now, piling up against the fence line, erasing the tracks the horse had left. In a few hours, there'd be no evidence he'd come here at all. "Why are you telling me this now?" she asked. "Because that horse didn't end up on your land by accident." Boone's voice was steady, but there was something beneath it, a thread of fear he was trying to keep buried. "Ethan bought Ash 6 months before he died. Paid cash, kept the paperwork hidden. I didn't even know about it until I found the receipt in his desk after the funeral." Nora turned. "Why would Ethan buy Drexel's horse?" "I don't know. But I know Ethan. He didn't do anything without a reason." Boone stood and walked to the window beside her. They both looked out at the barn, at the dark shape of the shelter, where the horse was standing. "That animal's here for a purpose, and whatever that purpose is, it got Ethan killed." The first light of dawn was starting to break over the mountains, pale and cold. Nora didn't say anything for a long time. Then she turned and walked to the mudroom. She pulled on her coat, laced up her boots, and picked up the rifle. "Where are you going?" Boone asked. "To check on the horse." "Nora." "Go home, Boone. Get some rest. You look like hell." He started to argue, then stopped. He knew her well enough to recognize when the conversation was over. She walked out into the snow. The storm had calmed, but the cold hadn't. The air was sharp enough to burn her lungs, and the sky was the color of iron. She crossed the yard to the barn, her boots crunching through snow that came up past her ankles. The horse was standing in the shelter, the blanket draped across his back. He'd eaten everything she'd left him. The water trough was half empty. When she approached, he raised his head and looked at her with those same dark, unreadable eyes. She set the rifle against the fence and stepped into the shelter. Up close in the early light, she could see details she'd missed in the storm. The brand burns were worse than she'd thought, deep enough to scar, placed with the kind of precision that spoke to intent. Someone had done this slowly, deliberately. She ran her hand along his neck, and he leaned into the touch, just slightly, the way horses do when they're starved for gentleness. "What did he do to you?" she whispered. The horse didn't answer, but he didn't pull away either. She stayed with him until the sun cleared the mountains. By the time she walked back to the house, Willa was awake. Her daughter sat at the kitchen table in her pajamas, a bowl of cereal in front of her, untouched. She was small for 8, narrow-shouldered and quiet, in the way children get when they've learned that the world doesn't always respond to noise. Her hair was dark like Ethan's, and her eyes were the same gray-blue as Nora's father's. She didn't look up when Nora came in. "Morning," Nora said. Willa stirred her cereal with a spoon, watching the milk swirl. "There's a horse." "There is. Boone says it's trouble." "Boone worries too much." Willa looked up at her then, and Nora saw something in her daughter's face that made her chest tighten. Not fear, not sadness, just a kind of resigned understanding that no 8-year-old should have. "Are we going to keep it?" Willa asked. "For now. What if the man who owns it comes?" Nora sat down across from her daughter. "Then we'll deal with it." Willa nodded slowly. She went back to stirring her cereal, and Nora watched her, this small, serious child who'd stopped asking questions that had easy answers. They sat in silence until the cereal got too soggy to eat. The men came at dawn the next day. Nora heard them before she saw them. A low rumble that started as a distant vibration and grew into the unmistakable sound of engines and hooves and voices carrying across open land. She was in the barn checking Ash's leg when the sound reached her. She straightened and walked to the barn door. The road that ran along the eastern edge of Brennan Ridge was a dirt track that saw maybe 3 vehicles in a good week. Now it was filled end to end with trucks and trailers and men on horseback moving as a single mass toward her gate. She counted. Gave up at 70. There were more than that. Maybe 100. Maybe more. They came in trucks with oversized tires and contractor logos on the doors. They came on horses, good horses, the kind that cost more than most people made in a year. And behind them, a line of men on foot carrying the kind of presents that didn't need uniforms to announce what they were. At the front, on a bay gelding that looked like it had been bred for parades, was Harlan Drexel. He was 58 tall and broad-shouldered, with the kind of face that photographs well and lies easily. His hair was silver, cut short and neat, and he wore a canvas coat that probably cost more than Nora's truck. He sat his horse like a man who'd been told his whole life that sitting a horse was a thing worth doing, and he'd believed it. Beside him was a shorter man in a sheriff's uniform, Earl Wickham. 55, soft around the middle, with eyes that never quite met yours. When he talked, Nora had seen him maybe twice in the past year, both times at the feed store in town, both times walking past her like she wasn't there, and on Drexel's other side a man she didn't recognize. Older, maybe 60, with the kind of face that had seen things and decided not to talk about them. He wore a federal marshal's badge on his belt and a Stetson that had weathered more storms than most. The procession stopped at her gate. Drexel dismounted. He didn't hurry. He took his time handing the reins to one of the men behind him, adjusting his coat, making sure everyone was watching before he walked to the gate and rested his hands on the top rail. "Mrs. Brennan," he called. His voice was smooth, the kind of voice that had spent years in boardrooms and campaign offices. "I apologize for the early hour, but I believe you have something that belongs to me." Nora stepped out of the barn. She didn't have the rifle this time. Didn't need it. She crossed the yard and stopped 20 feet from the gate, close enough to be heard, far enough to make him raise his voice if he wanted to be certain. "Mr. Drexel," she said, "I'm here for my horse. The horse in my barn is injured. I'm caring for it." Drexel smiled. It was a practiced thing, the kind of smile men use when they're being patient with someone they consider beneath them. "That's very neighborly of you, Mrs. Brennan. I appreciate the kindness, but Ash is a champion stallion worth a considerable sum, and I'd prefer to have my own veterinarian examine him. He'll be ready to move in a few days." The smile didn't waver. "I'm afraid I'll need him now. He's not ready." "Mrs. Brennan." The marshal stepped forward. His voice was rougher than Drexel's, but not unkind. "My name is Garrett Stone. I'm a federal marshal out of Helena. Mr. Drexel has documentation proving ownership of the animal in question. I'm here to ensure the transfer happens lawfully." Nora looked at him. "The animal in question was dying when I found it. Someone tortured it, burned it, left it to freeze in a blizzard. I don't care what your paperwork says. I'm not handing it over until I know it's safe." "Safe from what?" Drexel's voice had lost some of its smoothness. "From whoever did that to him." Drexel's jaw tightened. For a moment, the mask slipped, and Nora saw something underneath. Not anger. Something colder. More controlled. "Mrs. Brennan," he said quietly, "I understand you've been through a difficult time, losing your husband, managing this ranch on your own. It's admirable, truly. But you're making a mistake here. That horse is my property. I have every legal right to reclaim it. And I will. Then get a court order." "I have one." Sheriff Wickham pulled a folded paper from his jacket and held it up. "Signed by Judge Mercer this morning. Temporary injunction. You're not to move the horse pending an investigation into how it came to be on your property." Nora stared at the paper. "Investigation into what?" "Possible theft," Wickham said. "Ash was reported missing from Triple Crown Ranch 4 days ago. Now he's here. That raises questions. Questions about what I found him at my fence line. I didn't steal anything." "Then you won't mind if we take a look around?" Drexel stepped closer to the gate. "Just to verify the animal's condition. Make sure everything's above board. You're not setting foot on my land. Mrs. Brennan." Marshal Stone's voice was harder now. "The injunction gives us the authority to inspect the premises. You can cooperate or I can enforce the order. Your choice." Nora looked at the line of men behind them. 100 faces watching, waiting. She felt the weight of it, the sheer mass of force arrayed against her. And she understood what Boone had been trying to tell her. This wasn't about a horse. This was about power. about men who were used to getting what they wanted when they wanted it, and didn't much care who stood in the way. She took a breath. "You've got 48 hours, she said. "After that, I'm moving the horse to a veterinary facility in Billings. If you want to contest that, bring a lawyer." Drexel's smile returned, but it was thinner now, sharper. 48 hours. That's very reasonable, Mrs. Brennan. I'll be back tomorrow with my veterinarian, and we'll settle this like civilized people. He turned and walked back to his horse. The men behind him didn't leave. They stayed spreading out along the road, setting up camp like they planned to be there a while. Nora watched them unload tents and coolers, start fires in portable pits, settle in with the ease of people who'd done this before. Marshal Stone lingered at the gate. He looked at her for a long moment, and something passed across his face. Not sympathy, exactly, but recognition. The look of someone who'd seen this play out before and knew how it ended. "Ma'am," he said quietly, "if I were you, I'd make those calls. Get yourself a lawyer. This thing's gonna get complicated." Then he turned and walked back to his truck. Nora stood in the yard and watched the camp take shape. Smoke rising from a dozen fires. Men settling into chairs, passing around thermoses of coffee. The organized, patient presence of people who had nowhere else to be and all the time in the world to wait. Boone appeared at her side. She hadn't heard him approach. "Told you he'd come," he said. "You did. He's not leaving." "I know." They stood together in silence, watching the encampment grow. "What are you going to do?" Boone asked. Nora looked at him. At this old man who'd known her since she was a child, who'd taught her to ride and rope and fix a fence line in the dark, who'd promised her father he'd look after her and had kept that promise even when it cost him. "I'm going to find out why Ethan bought that horse," she said, "and then I'm going to finish whatever he started." Boone nodded slowly. "Then we'd better get to work." They walked back to the barn together. Inside, Ash stood in the shelter, his dark eyes watching them. Nora approached slowly, and he didn't move. She ran her hand along his neck, feeling the tension in the muscle, the wariness that hadn't left even after a night of food and rest. "What did Ethan need you for?" she whispered. The horse exhaled a long, tired sound. And somewhere in the distance beyond the camp, and the fires and the men who'd come to take him back, the wind picked up again, carrying with it the promise of another storm. The camp didn't leave. By noon the next day it had grown. More trucks arrived and more men, a generator that hummed loud enough to hear from the house. They weren't hiding what this was. This was occupation. The kind that settled in and made itself comfortable, that sent a message louder than words. We have time, we have resources, and we're not going anywhere until we get what we came for. Nora stood at the kitchen window and watched them through binoculars, counted heads, noted positions. The way Ethan had taught her to read land, she was reading this, looking for weak points, for patterns, for anything that might tell her what was coming next. Boone sat at the table behind her, his phone pressed to his ear. He'd been making calls since dawn. Old friends. People who owed him favors. Men he'd served with in a war that felt like it belonged to a different century. "Luther," he was saying, now his voice low and steady. "I need you to listen. No, I don't care if you've got plans. I'm calling it in. Yeah, the whole thing. I need you here by tonight." He hung up, looked at Nora. "Luther's coming," he said. "Hank and Davis, too. They'll be here before dark. I didn't ask you to call them. No. No, but you need them. Boone stood his knees cracking in the way old knees do. You're about to be outnumbered 100-1. Those boys and I fought in worse odds, but we had the United States Marine Corps backing us up. Out here, you've got me a phone line that'll probably go down in the next storm, and a sheriff who's already chosen sides. Nora lowered the binoculars. This isn't your fight, Boone. The hell it isn't. His voice was sharp, sharper than she'd heard it in years. Ethan was like a son to me. Your father asked me to watch over this place. That makes it my fight whether you want it to be or not. She turned to face him. He looked older in the daylight, the lines in his face deeper. The weight of 67 years sitting heavy on shoulders that had carried too much for too long. But his eyes were clear, steady. The eyes of a man who'd made a decision and wasn't interested in revisiting it. All right, she said. Then let's figure out what we're up against. They went to Ethan's office. The room was small, tucked into the back corner of the house where the morning light came in pale and slanted. Ethan had spent hours in here going over accounts, planning rotations, writing in the leather journal he kept locked in the desk drawer. Nora hadn't been in here since the funeral. Hadn't been able to. The room still smelled like him, like coffee and saddle leather, and the particular brand of soap he'd always used. Boone went straight to the filing cabinet, started pulling folders. What are we looking for? Nora asked. Anything about that horse, anything about water rights, anything that connects to Drexel. He set a stack of folders on the desk. Ethan kept records of everything. If he bought ash, there's paperwork. If he was planning something, he wrote it down. They worked in silence. Nora took the desk, Boone the cabinet. Outside, the sound of the camp drifted through the walls. Voices, laughter, the clang of metal on metal, the casual soundtrack of men who had nothing to worry about. It was Nora who found the journal. It was in the bottom drawer underneath a box of old receipts and a stack of topographical maps. Leather-bound, the kind with a strap that buckled closed. She'd seen Ethan writing in it 1,000 times, usually late at night, his hand moving across the pages in the careful script he'd learned from his grandmother. She unbuckled the strap and opened it. The first page was dated 6 months before his death. Met with Red Feather today. He confirmed what I suspected. The aquifer runs deeper than the survey showed. Triple Crown's been pulling from it for years. No permits, no oversight. Runoffs poisoning the creek. I showed him the soil samples. He wants to help, but he's scared. Can't blame him. Drexel's got reach. Nora flipped forward. The entries were sporadic, sometimes daily, sometimes weeks apart. But a pattern emerged. Ethan had been building a case, documenting water levels, contamination reports, conversations with engineers and hydrologists. He'd been methodical, careful, the way he approached everything. And then 3 months before his death, the tone shifted. Bought the horse today. Cash. Kept it off the books. Boone's going to ask questions, but I can't tell him yet. Can't tell anyone. If this works, it'll be the proof we need. If it doesn't, at least. I tried. Nora's hands tightened on the journal. Boone, she said quietly. He looked up from the filing cabinet. Ethan implanted something in the horse, she said. Some kind of recording device. He was using Ash to gather evidence on Drexel. Boone crossed the room and looked over her shoulder at the journal. Read the entry. His jaw tightened. That fool, he said, but there was no anger in it, just sadness. That damn fool. Nora kept reading. Released Ash onto Triple Crown land last week. Took him 3 days to get close to the main operation. Drexel's men are suspicious, but they haven't found the device yet. It's small enough embedded deep. If this works, I'll have recordings of every conversation that happens in that barn. Every deal. Every cover-up. Everything. The next entry was dated 2 days before Ethan died. Retrieved Ash this morning. The recordings are better than I hoped. Drexel's on tape admitting to the water fraud, to the contamination, to bribing state inspectors. I've got everything I need to bury him. Meeting with Calloway's office next week. Once this goes, federal Drexel won't be able to touch it. And then, in different ink-shakier handwriting, an entry with no date. If you're reading this, I'm gone. Nora, I'm sorry. I should have told you. Should have trusted you with this. But I thought I could handle it alone. I thought I could protect you by keeping you out of it. I was wrong. The device is still in Ash. Right front hoof embedded in the frog. You'll need an X-ray to find it. Maybe a vet who knows what they're looking for. Get it out. Get it to Senator Calloway. She'll know what to do with it. Don't let Drexel take the horse. Don't let him win. I love you. I love Willa. I'm sorry I won't be there to see her grow up. Finish this. Nora's vision blurred. She set the journal down and turned away, her hand over her mouth, trying to breathe through the weight in her chest. Boone didn't say anything. He just stood there, giving her the space to feel what she needed to feel. When she could speak again, her voice was rough. He knew. He knew Drexel would come for him. He knew, Boone agreed, and he did it anyway. Why didn't he tell me? Because he loved you, and he thought he was protecting you. Boone picked up the journal, closed it carefully. Men do stupid things when they think they're being noble. Nora wiped her eyes, turned back to the desk. We need to get that device out of Ash. We need more than that. We need help. Boone pulled out his phone. I'm calling the senator. He dialed, put it on speaker. The phone rang 4 times before a woman's voice answered. Clipped. Professional. Senator Calloway's office. This is Boone McCready. I need to speak with the senator. It's about Ethan Brennan. A pause. Hold, please. The hold music was classical. Strings. Something slow and careful. Then the music cut, and a different voice came on. Older. Sharp. This is Judith Calloway. Who am I speaking with? Boone McCready, ma'am. I'm calling from Brennan Ridge Ranch in Montana. Ethan Brennan's widow is here with me. We found his journal. We know about the recordings. Another pause, longer this time. When Calloway spoke again, her voice was careful. Mr. McCready, I'm going to need you to be very specific about what you're telling me. Ethan Brennan implanted a recording device in a horse. That horse is currently on this property. Harlan Drexel is outside our gate with 100 men demanding we turn it over. We need help. Where is the device now? Still in the horse. Have you extracted it? No, ma'am, we just found out about it an hour ago. Then extract it immediately. And do not let anyone near that animal until you do. Calloway's voice shifted, became harder. I'm going to send federal marshals to your location. How many men does Drexel have? Best count around 150 now. Maybe more. Jesus. A shuffle of papers. All right. I can have 12 marshals there by tonight. That's the best I can do on short notice. Can you hold until then? Nora leaned toward the phone. Senator, this is Nora Brennan, Ethan's wife. We'll hold. Mrs. Brennan. Calloway's voice softened slightly. Your husband was a good man. He came to me 6 months ago with evidence that could put Drexel away for 30 years. I told him to be careful. I told him to wait for federal protection before he moved forward. He didn't listen. He never did, Nora said. No, he didn't. A pause. I'm sorry for your loss, and I'm sorry it's taken this long to follow through. Politics gets in the way of justice more often than it should. But we're going to finish what Ethan started. I promise you that. Thank you, Senator. Don't thank me yet. Just stay alive until my people get there. The line went dead. Boone pocketed the phone, looked at Nora. We've got until tonight. That means we need to move now. Move how? Get that device out of Ash. Set up a perimeter. And pray Luther and the boys get here before Drexel decides he's tired of waiting. They went to the barn. Ash was standing in the same place he'd been all morning, his weight shifted off his left leg, his eyes tracking their movement. When Nora approached, he didn't move, just watched her with that same tired, wary patience. We need to check his hoof, Nora said. Right front. Boone grabbed a hoof pick from the tack room. If there's something in there, we're going to need more than this. We're going to need an X-ray machine, maybe a vet. We don't have time for that. Nora knelt beside Ash's front leg, and we don't have anyone we can trust. She ran her hand down the leg, feeling for heat, for swelling, for anything that might indicate trauma. The leg was sound, the hoof clean. She picked it up carefully, and Ash led her, his weight shifting to accommodate the movement. The frog of the hoof was dark, healthy, no visible damage, but when she pressed on it with her thumb, Ash flinched. There, she said. Something's in there. Boone knelt beside her. Can you see it? No, it's embedded deep. She set the hoof down. We're going to need to cut. Nora, if we cut wrong, we could lame him permanently. If we don't cut, Drexel's going to take him and destroy the evidence. She stood. Get me a scalpel and something to sterilize it. Boone hesitated. Then he nodded and went to get the supplies. Nora stayed with Ash, her hand on his neck, feeling the tension in him. I'm sorry, she whispered. I know you've been through enough, but I need you to trust me one more time. The horse's ear flicked toward her voice. Boone returned with a veterinary kit, old and battered but functional. Inside was a scalpel still sealed in plastic and a bottle of iodine. Nora sterilized her hands, then the blade, then knelt again and picked up Ash's hoof. Hold him steady, she said. Boone moved to Ash's head, one hand on the halter, the other stroking his neck. Easy, boy. Easy. Nora pressed the blade to the frog. The tissue was tougher than she expected, dense and fibrous. She had to apply real pressure to break through. Ash shifted his weight, but didn't pull away. Blood welled up dark and thick. She wiped it away with a cloth and kept cutting slow and careful, angling the blade toward the spot where Ash had flinched. And then she felt it. Something hard, foreign. She widened the cut slightly, just enough to get her fingers in, and pulled. The device came out slick with blood. It was small, maybe the size of a pill, encased in what looked like surgical-grade plastic. There was a tiny LED on one side, dark now, inactive. Nora held it up to the light. "That's it," Boone said. "That's what Ethan died for." Nora wrapped the device in a clean cloth and slipped it into her pocket. Then she packed Ash's hoof with gauze and wrapped it tight. The horse stood through all of it without complaint, his breathing steady, his eyes half closed. "You did good," she told him. "You did real good." She stood and looked at Boone. "Now we wait for the marshals. Now we get ready for war," Boone corrected. They spent the afternoon fortifying. Boone's friends arrived just after 2. 3 men in a truck that had seen better decades, armed with rifles and the kind of quiet competence that comes from years of training that never quite leaves you. Luther was 68, stocky and gray-bearded, with hands like cinder blocks. Hank was 66, tall and lean, with a scar running from his temple to his jaw. Davis was 70, the oldest of them, moving slower than the others, but with eyes that missed nothing. They'd served together in Iraq. Fallujah, Boone said. The kind of place that either broke you or made you harder than you had any right to be. They didn't ask questions. Boone gave them the situation in 3 sentences, and they nodded and got to work. They set up a perimeter. Nothing fancy, just basic defensive positions. Sandbags stacked at the corners of the barn. Firing lanes cleared. Sight lines established. The kind of preparation that said, "We're not looking for a fight, but if one comes, we're ready." Nora watched them work. These old men moving with the efficiency of muscle memory, setting up fields of fire like they were back in the desert instead of a Montana ranch. It should have felt absurd. Instead, it felt necessary. Willa came out of the house and stood beside her mother. She'd been quiet all day, watching from the window, not asking questions. Now she looked up at Nora with those serious gray eyes. "Are we in trouble?" she asked. Nora knelt down so they were eye level. "We're in a situation, but we're handling it. Because of the horse. Because of what the horse represents." "What does it represent?" Nora chose her words carefully. "Your father believed in doing the right thing, even when it was hard. Even when it was dangerous. That horse is part of that. And now we have to finish what he started." Willa looked past her toward the camp on the road. "There are a lot of them. There are. Are they going to hurt us?" "Not if I can help it." Willa nodded slowly. Then she reached into her pocket and pulled out something small and silver. Ethan's compass. The one he'd carried every day, the one Nora had given to Willa after the funeral. "Daddy said this always points home," Willa said. "No matter where you are." Nora's throat tightened. "That's right. Then we're already where we're supposed to be." She put the compass back in her pocket and walked back to the house, small and serious and braver than any 8-year-old should have to be. Nora stood and found Boone watching her. "She's got Ethan's spine," he said. "She shouldn't have to use it. No. But she does. And she will." Boone shouldered his rifle. That's the world we're giving her. Best we can do is make sure she survives it. The marshals arrived at 6, 12 of them in 4 vehicles led by Garrett Stone. They came without sirens, without announcement. Just pulled up to the gate and parked in a line that said, "We're here now and the rules just changed." Stone got out of the lead vehicle and walked to where Nora and Boone were waiting. "Mrs. Brennan," he said, "Senator Calloway briefed me. You have the device in." Nora pulled the cloth-wrapped package from her pocket and handed it over. Stone unwrapped it carefully, examined the device, then sealed it in an evidence bag. "This goes straight to the FBI lab in Salt Lake," he said. "Should have results in 48 hours. "And until then?" Nora asked. "Until then, my orders are to secure this location and ensure no one interferes with federal evidence." He looked past her toward the camp on the road. "How many does Drexel have out there now?" "Last count close to 200. Stone's jaw tightened. 200, Jesus. All right, here's how this works. My people set up a perimeter inside your property line. Drexel's people stay outside. Anyone crosses that line without authorization, they're interfering with a federal investigation. That's a felony. You think that'll stop them? I think it'll make them think twice." Stone turned to his team. "Set up the perimeter. I want eyes on every approach. No one gets in or out without my say-so." The marshals moved with practiced efficiency. Within an hour, they had positions established, communication lines, set up a command post in Nora's barn. It should have felt like relief. Instead, it felt like the calm before something worse. Drexel came to the gate at dusk. He didn't bring his whole force, just himself. Sheriff Wickham and 2 men in suits who had lawyer written all over them. He stopped at the property line and called out, "Mrs. Brennan, Marshal Stone. I'd like a word." Stone walked to the gate. Nora followed. Drexel looked at the federal presence at the marshals positioned around the property, and something shifted in his expression. Not fear. Recalculation. "This is quite a response for a simple property dispute," he said. "This isn't a property dispute," Stone replied. "This is a federal investigation. You're interfering with it." "Investigation into what?" "That's classified." Drexel smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Marshal, I don't know what Mrs. Brennan has told you, but I assure you there's been a misunderstanding. That horse is my legal property. I have documentation. I have witnesses. All I want is what's mine. Then you can file a civil claim, but the horse stays here until the investigation concludes." "And how long will that take?" "As long as it takes." Drexel's smile faded. He looked at Nora, and for a moment the mask dropped completely. What she saw underneath was cold, patient, dangerous. "Mrs. Brennan," he said quietly, "you're making this much harder than it needs to be. I came here offering you a way out. Money. A clean exit. But you've chosen to escalate. That's unfortunate." "Is that a threat?" Stone asked. "It's an observation." Drexel turned back to his horse. "I'll be in touch with my attorneys. We'll resolve this through proper channels." He rode back to the camp. Nora watched him go. He's not going to wait for proper channels. "No," Stone agreed. "He's not." The attack came at 3 in the morning. Nora was asleep when the gunfire started. 3 sharp cracks that jerked her awake, her hand already reaching for the rifle beside the bed. She was dressed and out the door before her mind fully caught up with her body. Outside, the world was chaos. Muzzle flashes lit the darkness. Shouts. The crack of return fire. She ran toward the barn, keeping low, her heart slamming against her ribs. Boone met her halfway, his rifle up his face, grim. They breached the south fence, 8 of them, marshals engaged. Casualties? Not yet, but it's close. They made it to the barn. Inside, Stone was coordinating on his radio, his voice calm despite the gunfire outside. All units, hold your positions. Do not pursue. I repeat, do not pursue. Let them come to us. One of the marshals appeared in the doorway, breathing hard. They're pulling back. Looks like a probe, not a full assault. Injuries? Stone asked. Johnson took a round in the vest. He's shaken but functional. Stone nodded. Get him checked out. Everyone else stay alert. This was a test. They wanted to see how we'd respond. The gunfire stopped as suddenly as it started. Nora moved to the barn door and looked out. In the distance, she could see figures retreating toward the camp. 8 men moving fast, disappearing into the darkness. They'll come again, Boone said beside her. This was just the opening. How long until they come in force? Depends on how desperate Drexel is, and how much he's willing to risk. Boone checked his rifle, his movements automatic. We heard him tonight. Made it clear we're not an easy target. That'll buy us time, but not much. Stone joined them. I've requested additional support from Helena, but the earliest they can get here is tomorrow afternoon. We need to hold until then. We'll hold, Nora said. Stone looked at her for a long moment. Ma'am, I need you to understand something. What's happening here, it's not normal. Drexel's escalating way past what makes sense for a property dispute, which means there's something bigger at stake than just that horse. I know what's at stake, Nora said. My husband figured out Drexel's been stealing water poisoning, land bribing inspectors. That recording device has evidence of all of it. Enough to put Drexel in prison for the rest of his life. Stone's expression didn't change, but something moved behind his eyes. Then he's going to come at this with everything he has. Because men like that, when they're cornered, they don't surrender. They burn everything down. The second attack came at dawn. This time it wasn't subtle. 20 men hit the north fence. Another 15 came from the east. They moved with coordination, with purpose, laying down suppressing fire, while others advanced. The marshals responded immediately, disciplined, professional. But they were outnumbered 3-1, and the attackers weren't playing by rules anymore. Nora was in the house with Willa when the window shattered. She grabbed her daughter and pulled her to the floor, covering her body with her own, as glass rained down. Outside, the gunfire was continuous now, a roar that seemed to come from everywhere at once. Stay down, Nora said. Don't move. Willa nodded, her eyes wide but steady. Nora crawled to the window and risked a look. The barn was under siege. Marshals were returning fire from the positions Boone and his friends had established. But the attackers were advancing using vehicles as cover, moving in coordinated teams. And then she saw him. Ash had broken out of the shelter, was running across the open ground toward the house, his injured hoof making his gait uneven, panicked. No, Nora breathed. No, no, no. She was on her feet and out the door before she could think about it. Bullets tore through the air around her. She heard Boone screaming her name, heard Stone shouting orders, but all she could focus on was the horse running toward her. Terrified, running toward the only safety he knew. She met him halfway across the yard, grabbed his halter, tried to turn him back toward the barn. And then Willa was there, running from the house, her small body outlined against the gunfire, her mouth open in a wordless cry. She was whistling. The tune her grandfather had taught her. The one Ethan used to hum when he worked. Ash heard it. His ears swiveled forward. He stopped running. Willa reached him, put her small hand on his neck, and the horse lowered his head to her level. Nora grabbed them both and pulled them toward the barn. Bullets kicked up dirt at their feet. Something hot grazed her shoulder, and she felt the wetness of blood, but didn't stop. They made it to the barn. Boone was there, and Luther pulling them inside, slamming the door behind them. "You stupid, brave, idiotic woman," Boone said, but his hands were gentle as he checked her shoulder. "You could have been killed. So could he." Nora looked at Ash, who was standing in the corner, his sides heaving, Willa's hand still on his neck. So could she. Outside, the gunfire intensified. Then gradually it began to fade. Stone's voice came over the radio. "All units report." One by one, the marshals checked in. 3 wounded, none critical. The attackers were retreating again. Stone appeared in the barn doorway, his face hard. "They're pulling back, but they'll come again. Probably within the hour." "How many more assaults can we take?" Nora asked. "1, maybe 2. After that, we're out of ammunition and options." He looked at her shoulder, at the blood soaking through her shirt. "You need medical attention. I need this to end. It will. One way or another." Stone's radio crackled. He listened, then his expression changed. "Hold on. We've got vehicles approaching from the west, unmarked, not part of Drexel's convoy." They moved to the window. Coming down the western access road, a line of trucks and old sedans, maybe 15 vehicles in all. They stopped at the property line, and men began to get out. Not soldiers, not contractors, ranchers, older men mostly with weathered faces and work-worn hands. And at the front, a man Nora recognized. Thomas Redfeather, 60 years old Navajo with silver hair tied back and eyes that had seen too much of the wrong side of history. He'd known Ethan, had worked with him on the water rights case. Boone opened the barn door and walked out. Nora followed. Redfeather met them halfway across the yard. "Heard you were having trouble," he said. "You heard right," Boone replied. Ethan was a good man. He kept his promises. Redfeather looked past them toward the camp on the road. "He promised us half the water rights if we help protect this land. We're here to collect." Behind him, 40 men were unloading rifles and supplies. Not soldiers, not trained fighters. Just men who'd had enough of being pushed around and had decided to push back. Stone approached his expression wary. "Sir, I appreciate the support, but this is a federal operation. I can't have civilians." "We're not civilians," Redfeather interrupted. "We're Navajo Nation, and we have legal claim to this land going back 150 years. Ethan Brennan was helping us prove that claim. Now he's dead, and the man who killed him is sitting outside that fence, thinking he can wait us out. He looked at Stone. You can accept our help or you can try to stop us. Your choice. Stone stared at him for a long moment. Then he nodded. Welcome to the fight. The Navajo spread out, taking positions alongside the marshals, reinforcing weak points, setting up additional fields of fire. Within an hour, the defensive perimeter had doubled in strength. Nora found Red Feather near the barn. Thank you, she said. Don't thank me yet. Drexel's not gonna stop just because we showed up. If anything, it'll make him more desperate. Red Feather looked at her shoulder at the makeshift bandage Boone had applied. You should get that looked at properly. I will. After this is over. After might be a long time coming. Then I'll wait. Red Feather smiled just slightly. You're like Ethan. Stubborn in all the wrong ways. He said the same thing about me. They stood together in silence, watching the sun climb higher, watching the camp on the road, where 200 men were waiting for the order to attack again. And somewhere in the distance, Nora heard the sound of helicopters. The helicopters weren't Drexel's. They came from the north. 3 of them flying low and fast. The kind of formation that said military precision, even if the birds themselves were civilian models. They passed over the camp on the road without slowing, banked hard over Brennan Ridge, and set down in the east pasture one by one. Nora shielded her eyes against the rotor wash and watched as figures emerged. Federal agents, she assumed. Maybe FBI. The kind of reinforcement Stone had been calling for since this started. But the first person out wasn't wearing tactical gear. She was 70, maybe older, in a wool coat and sensible boots, her gray hair pulled back in a way that suggested she didn't have time for vanity. She walked toward the barn like she owned the ground she was walking on, flanked by 2 younger agents who moved like they were used to following her lead. Stone met her halfway. They spoke briefly too quiet for Nora to hear. Then both turned and headed toward where Nora stood with Boone and Red Feather. Mrs. Brennan, Stone said, this is Senator Judith Calloway. Calloway extended her hand. Her grip was firm, her eyes sharp. Mrs. Brennan, I'm sorry we're meeting under these circumstances, and I'm sorry it took me this long to get here. You're here now, Nora said. That's what matters. Is it? Calloway looked past her toward the camp. How many casualties so far? 3 marshals wounded. 1 of my people grazed. No fatalities yet. Yet. Calloway's expression hardened. Drexel's escalating faster than I anticipated. That means he knows we have the evidence and he's willing to risk everything to keep it from going public. The device is with your people. It's being analyzed as we speak, but I don't need the lab results to know what's on it. Ethan gave me copies of some of the recordings 6 months ago. Enough to know that when this breaks, it's going to take down more than just Drexel. There are state officials involved, federal inspectors. This goes deep. Nora felt something cold settle in her stomach. How deep? Deep enough that I needed to come here personally. Deep enough that I brought a legal team, not just muscle. Calloway gestured to the agents behind her. These are federal prosecutors. They're here to witness whatever happens next. Because when this is over, I want everything documented. Every decision. Every action. Clean and airtight. You think Drexel's going to force a confrontation? I think he's already forced it. The question is how far he's willing to go. Calloway looked at Nora directly. Your husband was brave, Mrs. Brennan. Stupidly brave, if I'm being honest. He could have waited for federal protection, could have handed this off and kept himself safe. But he didn't. He went after Drexel alone because he thought it was the right thing to do. It was the right thing to do. Maybe. But it got him killed. Calloway's voice softened slightly. I don't want the same thing to happen to you. So I'm asking, do you have somewhere safe you can take your daughter? Somewhere away from here? Nora shook her head. This is our home. We're not leaving. Even if staying means, even then. Calloway studied her for a long moment. Then she nodded. All right. Then we hold this ground together. The next attack came at noon. This time, Drexel didn't send his men in waves. He sent them all at once. 50 from the north, 50 from the east. Another 50 spread across the south and west. A coordinated assault designed to overwhelm through sheer numbers. They came with vehicles for cover with suppressing fire. So heavy the air itself seemed to vibrate. The Marshals and Navajo held their positions, returned fire with discipline. But the math was brutal. 150 attackers against 52 defenders, and the attackers had the advantage of mobility. Nora was in the barn with Willa and Ash when the south wall took the first hits. Bullets punched through the old wood, sending splinters flying. She pulled Willa into the corner, shielded her with her body, and felt the building shake with each impact. Outside, the sound was apocalyptic. Gunfire, shouting, the crash of metal as one of the attackers' trucks rammed through the south fence and kept coming. Boone appeared in the doorway, his face streaked with dirt and blood that might have been his or someone else's. They're breaching the perimeter. We can't hold them. Where's Stone? Coordinating from the house, but he's running out of options. We need to pull back, consolidate positions. Pull back where this is as far back as we go. Boone didn't answer. He didn't have to. And then through the chaos, a new sound. Different from the gunfire. Deeper. More controlled. Explosions. 3 of them in rapid succession coming from the direction of the road camp. Nora risked a look through the barn door and saw smoke rising black and thick. One of Drexel's vehicles was on fire. Another was overturned. The gunfire faltered. Confusion rippled through the attackers. What the hell was that? Boone said. The answer came over Stone's radio, loud enough for Nora to hear even across the yard. This is Air National Guard Captain Riley Chen. We have authorization from Governor's office to intervene in ongoing federal investigation. All hostile forces cease fire immediately, or face military engagement. Nora looked up. High above, a military helicopter circled, its weapon systems clearly visible. The gunfire stopped. For a moment, the silence was so complete it felt unreal. Then slowly, the attackers began to retreat. Not running. Walking backward, weapons lowered but not dropped. Moving toward the road with the careful deliberation of people who just realized they'd miscalculated badly. Stone emerged from the house, his radio in hand. He looked up at the helicopter, then at Calloway, who stood near the barn with a satellite phone pressed to her ear. You called the guard? He asked. I called everyone, Calloway replied. FBI, ATF, State Police, and yes, the National Guard. This is now a federal incident with multiple agencies involved. Drexel just attacked a sitting U.S. Senator's protective detail. That's a line even his lawyers can't make disappear. Stone allowed himself a small smile. Hell of a time to show up. I was waiting for him to commit. Now he has. Calloway lowered the phone. We're ending this. Today. The arrests began within the hour. Federal agents poured onto the property not to reinforce the defense, but to begin collecting evidence, documenting the damage, photographing shell casings and bullet holes in the burned-out vehicles on the road, and arresting people. They started with the attackers who were still close enough to grab. 23 men in the first sweep pulled from their trucks and cuffed before they understood what was happening. Then they moved to the camp where another 40 surrendered without resistance once they saw the National Guard helicopter and the line of federal vehicles blocking the only exit. Drexel wasn't among them. He'd left during the assault, Stone learned from one of the captured men, driven away in an unmarked truck heading west toward the state line. Issue a bolo, Calloway told the FBI agent coordinating the arrests. I want him found before he crosses into Idaho. Yes, ma'am. Nora watched it all from the porch of the main house, Willa beside her. Her daughter hadn't said a word since the shooting stopped. Just stood there holding Ethan's compass, watching the federal agents move through the property like they owned it. Is it over? Willa asked finally. Not yet, Nora said. But soon. Boone climbed the porch steps, moving slower than usual. He had a cut over his left eye and his shirt was torn, but he was walking under his own power. Luther's hurt, he said. Took a round in the leg. Medics are with him now, say he'll be fine. And the others? Hank's got a concussion. Davis is exhausted but whole. The Navajo lost 2 men. Good men. His voice was heavy. They died protecting land that wasn't even theirs. It was theirs, Red Feather said, appearing from around the corner of the house. His face was grim. This land has always been ours. Ethan understood that. That's why he fought for it. I'm sorry, Nora said. I'm sorry your people paid that price. Don't be sorry. Finish it. Red Feather looked toward the road where agents were still making arrests. Make sure their sacrifice meant something. They found Drexel 6 hours later. He'd made it 40 miles west before a state trooper pulled him over for a broken taillight. Routine stop. But the trooper ran his plate, saw the bolo, and called it in. By the time the FBI arrived, Drexel was sitting on the hood of his truck, hands visible, looking more tired than angry. They brought him back to Brennan Ridge in handcuffs. Nora was in the barn when they let him past. He looked at her through the open door, and for a moment their eyes met. She expected hatred or defiance. But what she saw was something closer to resignation. The look of a man who'd played every card he had and watched them all fail. He didn't say anything, just kept walking. Senator Calloway found Nora an hour later, sitting in the barn with Ash. The horse was calmer now, eating hay, the panic of the assault finally wearing off. The lab results came back, Calloway said. Nora looked up, and everything Ethan said would be there is there. Conversations about water fraud, about bribing inspectors, about covering up contamination that's been poisoning groundwater for 5 years. Calloway sat down on a hay bale across from her. We've got Drexel on enough federal charges to put him away for 3 decades. And we've got paper trails leading to 6 state officials and 2 federal inspectors who took bribes to look the other way. When does it go public? Tomorrow. I'm holding a press conference in Helena. Full disclosure. Every recording, every document, everything Ethan collected. She paused. I'm going to credit him. Make sure everyone knows he's the reason this came to light. Nora felt her throat tighten. Thank you. Don't thank me. I should have moved faster. Should have protected him better. Maybe if I had, he'd still be alive. Maybe. Or maybe he'd have found another way to get himself killed doing the right thing. Nora managed a small smile. He was stubborn like that. Calloway stood. There's going to be a trial. Multiple trials. You'll be called to testify. It's going to be ugly. I know. And there's going to be blowback. Drexel has friends. People who benefited from his operation. They'll come after you. Legally, financially, any way they can. Let them come. Calloway studied her. You're a lot like your husband, Mrs. Brennan. I'll take that as a compliment. It is. Calloway moved toward the door, then stopped. One more thing. The water rights. Ethan's documentation proves the aquifer is on your land. You have legal claim to it. That means you control who uses it and how. I know what Ethan wanted to do with it. Then do it. Honor his promise to the Navajo. Share it fairly. Build the kind of system that actually protects the land instead of bleeding it dry. She smiled slightly. Be the kind of person Drexel couldn't be. The trial took 8 months. Nora testified 3 times. Sat in federal court and told the story of Ethan's investigation. Of finding the journal, of extracting the device from Ash's hoof, while bullets tore through the air outside. The defense attorneys tried to tear her apart, suggested she'd fabricated evidence that Ethan had been paranoid that the recordings were taken out of context. But the evidence was too strong, too documented, too thorough. Harlan Drexel was sentenced to 32 years in federal prison. The state officials went down next one by one. The inspectors lost their jobs and their pensions. And the water rights case went through. The aquifer on Brennan Ridge was officially recognized as Nora's property with a legal easement granting the Navajo Nation 50% usage rights in perpetuity. The system they built was simple, sustainable, monitored by both parties. No fraud, no theft. Just fair distribution of a resource both sides needed. It was exactly what Ethan had wanted. Nora stood at Ethan's grave on a morning 8 months after the siege, Willa beside her. The headstone was simple, just his name and the dates and the words, he died doing the right thing. We finished it, Dad, Willa said quietly. She'd started talking to the grave a few months back after the nightmares finally stopped. We did what you wanted. Nora put her arm around her daughter's shoulders. We did. Do you think he knows? I think he does. They stood there for a while, listening to the wind move through the grass. Then Willa pulled the compass from her pocket, the one she'd carried every day since Ethan died. Grandpa Boone gave me something else, she said, before he left. What's that? He said Grandpa Declan told him the same thing Daddy told you, that some things are worth fighting for even when you don't know if you'll win. She looked up at Nora. Do you think that's true? I know it is. Then I want to stay here. When I grow up, I want to keep this place. Nora felt something break open in her chest. Not grief this time. Something else. Something that felt like hope. Then we'll keep it together, she said. They walked back to the house hand in hand. Boone was waiting on the porch. He'd aged in the months since the siege, moved slower, tired easier. But his eyes were still clear, still steady. Heard from Red Feather, he said. The new well system's operational. Clean water flowing to both sides, monitored and certified. He wanted me to tell you it's working exactly like Ethan designed it. That's good news. It is. Boone looked past her toward the barn. You keeping the horse, Nora smiled. He's not really mine to keep, but I'm not giving him back either. That's probably wise. They sat together on the porch, the three of them watching the sun drop toward the mountains. In the pasture beyond the barn, Ash grazed alongside the other horses. His injured hoof healed his coat, glossy in the late afternoon light. He looked different now, healthier, calmer, like he'd finally stopped running. Boone, Nora said after a while. Thank you for everything, for standing with us, for keeping your promise to my father and to Ethan. Don't thank me yet, Boone said. I'm not done keeping it. What do you mean? I mean I'm not going anywhere. Not until Willa's grown and this place is secured. I gave Ethan my word I'd look after you both. A man doesn't walk away from that just because the hard part's over. Willa leaned against him, and Boone's arm went around her shoulders automatically. Natural, the way grandfathers do. Besides, he added quietly, you're all the family I've got left. Where else would I go? They sat there until the stars came out. 3 people who'd survived something they shouldn't have, holding on to each other and the land they'd fought for. 6 weeks later, Nora received a package. It arrived by courier, no return address, just her name written in careful script on the outside. Inside was a folded piece of paper and something wrapped in cloth. She unwrapped the cloth first. Boone's compass, the one he'd carried through Iraq, the one he'd given to Willa during the siege. Her hands went cold. She unfolded the paper. The handwriting was Boone's, unmistakable though shakier than usual. Nora, if you're reading this, I'm gone. Heart gave out most likely. Been feeling it coming for a few weeks now. Didn't want to worry you and didn't want to die in some hospital bed hooked up to machines. I'm at the north pasture. Thought that seemed right. Good view. Peaceful. Tell Willa I'm sorry I won't see her grow up, but I know she'll be fine. She's got your strength and Ethan's heart. That's all she needs. The compass goes to her. Tell her to use it the way her grandfather used it. Not to find home, but to remember she's already there. You did good, Nora. Better than good. You honored Ethan's memory. You kept your promises. You raised your daughter in a place worth fighting for. That's all any of us can hope to do. I kept my word. To Declan, to Ethan, to you. I protected what needed protecting. Now it's your turn. Don't cry for an old Marine. I gotta die on land I love, protecting people who mattered. That's more than most get. Boom. Nora's vision blurred. She set the letter down and picked up the compass, feeling the weight of it in her palm. The metal was warm, worn smooth by decades of handling. She walked to Willa's room and found her daughter doing homework at her desk. "Willa," she said quietly. Her daughter looked up, saw the compass, and understood immediately. "Grandpa Boone," Nora nodded, not trusting her voice. Willa took the compass carefully, held it the way you hold something precious and fragile. Her eyes filled, but she didn't cry. Just sat there, this small, serious girl who'd learned too young what loss felt like. "Did he suffer?" she asked. "No, I don't think he did." "Good." Willa opened the compass, watched the needle settle north. "He told me once that the needle doesn't point to a place. It points to the truth. And the truth is you're always where you're supposed to be if you're with people who love you." He was right about that. They found Boone the next morning exactly where his letter said he'd be. He'd chosen a spot under an old cottonwood at the edge of the north pasture, where you could see clear to the mountains on a good day. He looked peaceful, like he'd just decided to sit down and rest. They buried him beside Ethan and Declan Brennan, 3 generations of men who'd understood what it meant to stand for something. The funeral was small, just Nora, Willa, a handful of neighbors, and all 40 of the Navajo who'd stood with them during the siege. Redfeather spoke his words simple and true. Luther and Hank and Davis stood at attention the whole time, 3 old Marines saying goodbye to one of their own. When it was over and everyone had left, Nora and Willa stayed by the grave. "What do we do now, Mom?" Willa asked. Nora looked out across the land. Their land. Bought with money they didn't have. Defended at a cost they couldn't measure. Kept alive through sheer refusal to let it go. "We keep going," she said. "We run the ranch. We honor the agreements Ethan made. We protect this place for the people who'll come after us. Just us. Just us. For now." Nora put her arm around her daughter. "But that's enough." The seasons turn. Winter came hard that year, the kind that tested fence lines and livestock, and the resolve of anyone trying to make a living on stubborn land. But Brennan Ridge held. The water system Ethan designed kept flowing. The partnership with the Navajo deepened, evolved into something more than just a legal agreement. It became a friendship, a shared stake in the future. Willa grew, learned to ride the way her father had ridden, learned to read land and sky and the small signs that meant drought or plenty. On her 10th birthday, she asked Nora if they could get her own horse. "We have horses," Nora said. "I want Ash." Nora looked at her daughter. "Ash isn't really ours, honey. He's just here. I know. But I want to take care of him, the way you took care of him when he needed help." So Ash became Willa's horse, not through ownership, but through care, through the daily work of feeding and grooming and riding, through the bond that forms between a girl and an animal who'd survived something terrible and chosen to keep living anyway. On the 1st anniversary of Ethan's death, Nora took Willa to all 3 graves. Declan's, Ethan's, Boone's. They brought flowers, though the wind would take them before the day was out. "Do you miss them?" Willa asked. "Every day. Do you think we'll be okay without them?" Nora knelt down eye level with her daughter. We'll be better than okay. We'll be what they hoped we'd be. Strong, fair, stubborn in all the right ways. How do you know what the right ways are? You don't, not always. But you try. And when you mess up, you try again. That's all anyone can do. Willa thought about that. Then she pulled out Boone's compass and checked the direction. North, she said. Same as always. Same as always. Nora agreed. They rode back to the house together. Mother and daughter moving through land that had cost them everything and given them back just enough to keep going. 3 years after the siege, Nora received another visitor. Not a senator this time. Not federal agents or marshals or men with guns. Just a young woman in her mid-20s driving a beat-up sedan with California plates. She knocked on the door just after dawn, and when Nora answered, she introduced herself as Sarah Mackenzie, a journalist from the Los Angeles Times. I'm writing a piece about environmental whistleblowers, she explained. People who put everything on the line to expose corruption. Your husband's case kept coming up in my research. I was hoping you'd be willing to talk about it. Nora almost said no. Almost closed the door and went back to her coffee and the quiet morning routine that didn't include dredging up memories that still hurt. But then she thought about Ethan, about what he'd wanted. Not fame, not recognition, just for the truth to matter. All right, she said. Come in. They talked for 3 hours. Nora told the story from the beginning. The storm, the horse, the journal, the siege, the trial. All of it. Sarah took notes, asked careful questions, never pushed when Nora needed to pause. When it was done, Sarah closed her notebook and looked at Nora with something like awe. That's incredible, she said. Your husband was a hero. He was a rancher who did what he thought was right. That's what heroes are, Mrs. Brennan. Regular people who choose right over easy. The article ran 6 months later. Front page of the Sunday edition. The rancher who wouldn't back down. How one man's evidence brought down a water empire. Nora read it once, then folded it carefully and put it in the box with Ethan's journal and Boone's letter. Things worth keeping. Evidence that they'd been here. That they'd mattered. The article brought more attention. Other journalists, documentary filmmakers, people wanting to tell the story of the little ranch that stood against the machine and won. Nora turned most of them down, but a few she let in because she understood something now. The story wasn't just about Ethan. It was about what happens when ordinary people refuse to be pushed around. When they stand their ground even when the odds are impossible. That story she thought was worth telling. Willa turned 13 the year the documentary aired. She watched it in the living room sitting between Nora and Redfeather, who'd become a fixture at the ranch over the years. A friend. An advisor. Family in the way that matters more than blood. When it was over, Willa turned to Nora. Did all that really happen? She asked. You were there for most of it. I know, but I was 8. I didn't understand what it meant. What does it mean now? Willa was quiet for a moment. Then she said, it means we don't give up, even when we should, even when it would be easier. That's right. Is that what you're teaching me, to be stubborn? Nora smiled. I'm teaching you to know what's worth being stubborn about. The rest is just details. Time moved forward the way it does. Willa graduated high school, turned down scholarships to colleges in places with easier weather and better opportunities, chose instead to stay on the ranch to learn the business from the ground up, to prepare for the day when it would be hers alone. Nora watched her daughter grow into someone she barely recognized. Strong, capable, unafraid. The kind of woman who could face down 100 men with guns and not blink. The kind of woman Ethan would have been proud of. On what would have been Ethan's 50th birthday, Nora took flowers to his grave alone. Willa had offered to come, but Nora wanted this moment for herself. She sat in the grass beside the headstone and talked to him the way she used to talk to him in bed at night, before sleep when the day's work was done. And it was just the two of them in the dark. "We did it," she said. "Everything you wanted. The water's protected. The Navajo have their rights. Drexel's dying in prison, and the people he bribed went down with him. The ranch is thriving. Willa's strong." The wind moved through the grass, and somewhere in the distance a hawk cried. "I miss you," Nora said. "Every damn day. But I'm okay. We're okay." Boone kept his promise. He stayed until we didn't need him anymore. And then he left on his own terms, just like you would have wanted. She stood, brushed the dirt from her knees. "I'm gonna keep this place alive," she said. "For Willa. For the Navajo. For everyone who depends on the water we protect. I'm gonna make sure your sacrifice meant something." She walked back to the truck and drove home, where Willa was waiting with dinner on the table and ash in the barn, and 100 small reminders that life goes on even after loss, even after grief. That night, Nora stood on the porch and looked out across the land. The same land her grandfather had bought with borrowed money. The same land her father had died defending. The same land Ethan had given his life to protect. It was just land. Just dirt and grass and water and stubborn determination. But it was theirs. And as long as she had breath in her body, it would stay that way. She thought about the horse that had appeared in the storm all those years ago. Ash, who'd carried the evidence that changed everything. He was old now, gray around the muzzle, moving slower. But he was still here, still standing, like the land itself, like the people who'd fought for it, still standing. Nora went inside, locked the door behind her, and sat down at the kitchen table where Ethan used to drink his coffee and read the grain reports. She opened his journal one more time, read the last entry he'd ever written. "Finish this." "I did," she said to the empty room. "We all did." And somewhere in the house, Willa was humming Declan's old song, the one that had calmed a terrified horse in the middle of a gunfight, the one that had become their family's anthem without anyone deciding it should be. The song that said, "We're still here. We're still fighting. We're still home." Nora closed the journal and turned out the light. Tomorrow there would be work. There always was. Fences to mend, cattle to move, water systems to monitor, partnerships to maintain. The endless, grinding work of keeping a ranch alive in a world that didn't make it easy. But tonight, there was just this quiet house, this land they'd bled for, this daughter who carried forward the best parts of everyone who'd come before. It was enough. It would always be enough. Outside, the Montana wind picked up, carrying with it the smell of snow and sage, and the promise of another hard winter. The kind that would test them, push them, demand everything they had, and then ask for more. They'd survived worse. They'd survive this too. Because that's what Brennans did. What they'd always done. What Willa would teach her own children to do someday when this land passed to the next generation and the next. They stood their ground. They kept their promises. They finished what needed finishing. And they never ever backed down from doing what was right no matter what it cost. That was the legacy. Not the land itself, but the will to protect it. Not the water, but the refusal to let it be stolen. Not the victory, but the courage to fight, even when losing seemed certain. Ethan had understood that. Boone had understood that. Declan before them. Now it was Nora's turn to pass it forward. She walked to Willa's room, stood in the doorway watching her daughter sleep. 13 years old and already taller than Nora had been at that age. Already stronger. Already certain of who she was and what she stood for. Nora thought about the compass on Willa's nightstand. About the truth it represented. Not direction but purpose. Not destination but home. She thought about the horse in the barn who'd survived torture and betrayal. And a blizzard that should have killed him, who'd chosen to keep living anyway. She thought about 3 old Marines who'd answered a call for help because loyalty mattered more than safety. She thought about 40 Navajo who'd risked everything to protect land that treaties said was theirs, but history said they'd never keep. She thought about a senator who'd fought the system from inside, who'd used power to protect the powerless instead of herself. And she thought about Ethan, about his journal entries and his careful plans and his absolute unshakable belief that some things were worth dying for. He'd been right. Nora closed Willa's door quietly and went to her own room. She lay down in the bed she'd shared with Ethan for 9 years. And now slept in alone. She closed her eyes, and for the first time in 3 years, she slept without dreaming of storms or sieges, or the moment they'd found Ethan's body in the north pasture. She slept like someone who'd finished a long journey and finally made it home. When she woke, it was dawn, and Willa was already up feeding the horses, starting the day's work. The way they'd start every day from now until the land itself gave out. Or they did. Nora joined her in the barn. Together they moved through the morning routine. Feed, water, check hooves and teeth, and the 100 small things that kept animals healthy and alive. Ash nickered when Willa approached, lowered his head so she could scratch behind his ears. The old horse who'd started everything, who'd come to them broken and left them whole. "He's happy here," Willa said. "I think he is. Do you think he knows what he did? How important he was?" Nora looked at the horse, at his dark eyes and graying muzzle, and the scars that would never fully fade. "I think he knows he's safe," she said. "That's all any of us really want." They finished the morning work and walked back to the house together. Mother and daughter, the last of the Brennans, the ones who'd stood when standing seemed impossible, the ones who'd kept the promises others had died making, the ones who'd looked at a dying horse in a storm and chosen kindness over caution, not knowing that choice would cost them everything and give them back something more valuable than safety could ever be. The knowledge that they'd done the right thing. That when the test came, they'd measured up. That Ethan and Boone and Declan and all the others who'd fought for this land hadn't fought in vain. The story didn't end with victory. It never does. There would be more fights, more threats, more years of drought and debt, and the grinding work of keeping something alive that the world kept trying to kill. But they'd face it the way they'd faced everything else. Together, unafraid, with the kind of stubborn grace that turns ordinary people into the kind of ancestors worth remembering. That was the real inheritance. Not the land, not the water, not the legal victories or the news articles or the documentary that would play in film festivals and classrooms for years to come. The inheritance was this, the certainty that when the moment came to choose between easy and right, you chose right. Every time, no matter what. That's what Nora would teach Willa. That's what Willa would teach her children. And down through generations yet unborn, that lesson would echo forward, carried in the blood and bone of people who understood that some things are worth protecting, even when the cost is everything you have. Especially then. The wind picked up again, carrying the scent of sage and snow, and the clean, endless promise of land that would outlast them all. Nora Brennan stood on her porch and looked out at the ranch that had nearly killed her and saved her in equal measure. And she smiled. This was home. This was enough. This was everything that mattered. And tomorrow, when the work began again, she'd be ready. They both would. Because that's what Brennans did. They endured.